Good morning and welcome to our live talk program. This is Lloyd over here, your host on Revive Reform Radio, doing our live talk program covering natural health on your Wednesday morning rise and shine. And this morning here, we're looking at post-disaster health issues. So we're going to be just talking about, I'm going to read an article and then share some ideas and Bible passages on post-disaster preparedness, how to deal with some of the health issues that comes up after a disaster. And some of it is what you do before, and I think most of it is what you do before, or what you understand you need to do before a disaster strikes. So we're gonna talk about this morning here, some post-disaster preparedness or issues that will come up when there is a disaster. So hopefully the blessing that rests, and you're ready to take on it today. And thanks again for joining me. And I'll start with a short prayer. Our Father, what in heaven, we thank thee again for the blessings of this day, and we thank thee, dear Lord, for thy word. I pray that you may be with us as we look into these things that are happening around us, and may we take note and be prepared and as best as possible. May you continue to bless us, we pray, for Christ's sake. Amen. So again, we're looking at post-disaster preparedness, how to be prepared. As you know, you can only be so much prepared for any issue or anything that come up. But there's some things that you can do for yourself before the issue, if you understand what will happen in these times of trouble, what will happen in these times of trouble. And what will happen depend on where you live and what type of issue you're going to face. And so whatever you're going to face, it's always best to be forewarned. If you have an idea of what could happen, then it's easier for you to deal with that. So post-disaster preparedness, and this is what we're looking at here. So I have a text I want to share with you before as we go into this topic here. And this is found in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 32 through 34. It says, "Now learn the parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. Likewise, ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the door. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." And so this is Christ here speaking, and he speaks of this idea that you can know when things are about to break off. And most essentially, he's talking here about the second coming. But it's also important for you to see and know when things are going to go bad and what could go bad. What's the possibility? What is within the scope of your thinking, your imagination, that could go bad. And the moment you figured out this, then you start to have your contingency plans. You start to think, what would I do if this and this happen or such happen? And that's basically how you want to be. Always remember the story of the Jews in the time of Hitler. The Jews basically, it was said that many of the elders and people knew what was coming because they were hearing the echoes or the statements. And Jews are supposed to be historically well familiar with the persecution that they face the world over. And so they could hear certain things being said. And when you hear certain things be said, then you know trouble is nigh. And so if you know trouble is nigh, and say you had a plan, your plan was to go out there, make money, get a new car, get some new clothes, so forth, and you hear that trouble is nigh, it is time for you to start to having a contingency plan, because you know disaster is about to strike. And you don't want to wait until the disaster strike and you say, oh, we got caught and we're surprised. You want to not do like what the Jews do. You want to say, well, I hear what this guy is saying. This guy's rallying the people. And he's speaking stuff that sound like he want to prep up the country to go to war and so forth. So you start to have some contingency plan. And so it's the same thing. When we see these type of disasters happening, we got to know that this is not something that's going to stop. Now, I know many will say, well, there hasn't been a disaster in a while. Disasters calmed down. Probably the biggest thing that happened was Sandy. And that's true to a certain degree. But remember, there's consistent disasters that are happening across the country on a daily basis. on a weekly basis. It's just that every now and then we'll have one of these massive things, and then many a time it calms down. But it never really calmed down because there's always a consistent rumble of disasters. We are just about to enter into the hurricane season, and then sorry, the tornado season. We're in the peak of the hurricane. We're going to enter the tornado season soon. There's always these fires burning. Right now, there's how many fires burning. You have the heroin epidemic. You have the drug epidemic on various different levels, separate from the heroin and the fentanyl epidemic. You have the gangbangers epidemic, where these hoodlums, they will take over a community, and you have to have a plan. You have to say, well, what if my community get overrun, and the police are not able to quench the wickedness? What do I do? So it's important. So don't get flat-footed. Don't think that things can go to hell in a handbasket, so to speak, like France and the Civil War in France in the 1700s. Understand and know that things are gonna can go real bad, and it can get from bad to worse, and then you make your preparation. So what we're gonna talk about this morning here, as I read in Matthew, says no, see the signs, and don't be like ignoring the signs and say, well, that's just what happened in Florida. More is yet to come, as we know, and as I believe, that some of these tornadoes will get out of control and take out major cities. Know and have a contingency plan that if I'm in a dead, zone like that, what do I do? So I'm gonna read this article here just to talk about not so much what happened before the storm, because we're past these two storms, but what happened after the storm, as you're seeing the news unravel and things are breaking out, and we talk about what's going on here. So we'll go straight into the article, and then I get back to some concepts here of whatever mindset you need to be for your health, because this is going to be the major factor. If you live, then what do you do? So you didn't die, and you made it through the storm. Great. Now what happened after? And a lot of that has to do with what you do before. So here's the article. This is written by Maggie Fox over there in NBC News, NBC News, and it's entitled Mosquitoes, Medicine, and Mold. Texas battle post-Harvey health issues. Dr. Carrie DeMoore has a nasty cough, and she's not sure if it is allergies or one of the common respiratory infections that has been spreading since Hurricane Harvey hit southeast Texas last month. She's been sleeping in a trailer adjacent to her freestanding emergency room and urgent care clinic in Rockport, Texas, which was devastated by Harvey's wind and flood waters. The clinic had only been open for 2 weeks when Harvey hit. DeMoore is home in Dallas now for a few days with her children, but will soon head back to the clinic, which is overwhelmed by people crowding in for stitches, tetanus shots, ear infections, and skin rashes. We were seeing numbers outpacing anything we were prepared to take care of, said DeMoore, an ER physician who is CEO of Code 3 ER and Urgent Care. Physician volunteers have been cramming into trailer and sleeping on clinic floors as they tend to as many as 90 patients a day. Larry Hamilton described a similar scene at Christ Clinic in Katy, west of Houston. We typically see about 200 patients a week. In the first week, we saw triple that, said Hamilton, a registered nurse who is executive director for the clinic. Volunteer doctors from as far afield as Vermont, Minnesota, Oregon have brought cots and are camped out in the clinic and at other nearby facilities, offering their service as needed. They are showering at the YMCA, Hamilton says. No one single entity has authority over health matters in Texas, which has a history of turning away federal funding and oversight, and which has a limited Medicaid program. County health authorities, like the one in Harris County, takes care of issues like mosquito, clean water, inspection, inspecting restaurants and some vaccinations, but free and charity clinics like Christ Clinic and for-profit operations like Code 3 struggle in best of times to fill the gap. Now, post Harvey, they are overwhelmed. And so I'll pause there again. Just don't want to miss some of those important points. So you think about it, Texas is kind of like a cowboy state for real. They kind of just go out there and ride like they're in the West. So they kind of do things differently, most naturally, and various different states do things differently. So you gotta know kind of where you at, and that's to me is a very important consideration when you're thinking about post disaster. How does your state respond? Because remember, you could be in a zone like a state where there it taxes are very low, so services are very low. There's some states that they don't, what you pay for taxes very low, so you pay for very limited services. So if in a state of disaster, there's limited funds, there's limited infrastructure, because you're paying that much into the systems that are there. So when the systems are needed, they're just not available because everybody take care of their own. So it's a philosophy that it has nothing to do with per se one's politics. It just has to do with the area you live in. Some areas they have a kind of let me go it alone. Most naturally, Texas would be one of those areas. There's other areas that they're more probably liberal control, and they want to take care of you, they say, from cradle to the grave. And so sometimes they build up a greater infrastructure and have more facilities available. So anyhow, so you consider that, well, where you're located, what type of services will be offered, or what type of situation you're in. Because most naturally, as I say, they're not taking Medicaid program and stuff like that. And if you're in a situation where you are has less money, you could be in other problems, especially if you're broke and need medical care. You end up gonna need some serious charity care. So consider that well. So notice here now, some of the major issues is mosquitoes, clean water, inspection of food facility, and other things like tetanus shots, so vaccination. So how are you gonna get those things taken care of? Very important to consider. So continue here back to the article. So far, there are no big epidemic to cope with. Harris County Health Department had to squelch rumors that plague was being spread by flood water. Plague is carried by fleas, not in water. So on the social media and Twitter and stuff like that, people were spreading rumors that the plague was being carried by the waters and people were getting the plague. This turned out most naturally to not be true, because plagues are carried by things like rodents and stuff like that, and fleas, so not in water. So I pause here because again, it's important to consider that when there is a disaster, the possibility of disease outbreaks increase, because it's harder to deliver medical care. So that's something that you have to consider well. I remember, if you go back to my program a week ago or so, remember I was talking about this idea here that it's important for you to be able to have something like a go bag, some type of means of able to have some little things with you if you have to go in the case of disaster, or you have to be out of your house. Because like you look at what happened in Florida and what happened in Texas, it's people had to be out of their house. So you could even be in a situation where you are in, say, a hotel room and you have to flee, but you have somewhere to stay. In your go bag, it's important to have whatever medicines that you need and whatever herbal remedies that you need. And in a future program, I'll cover some of what I believe, and I'll give some blurbs here. What that you need to be able to have if you're just going to grab and go. Because as I say, if you have to be outdoors and you have to flee, what happens? You can have more exposure to the environment. You're not going to have the protection of a house. And if you're even in a hotel room, you're still going to need certain things. So whatever herbs, whatever supplements, whatever nutrients you need, make sure you have those things a backup of those things. But we keep going here. So this is the type of rumors that spreading. But remember, sickness always going to increase when there's a disaster. Continue back to the article. It says, but there are plenty other messes left behind by Hurricane Harvey flood waters. They include masses of mosquitoes, respiratory infection, and a dramatic worsening of the day-to-day ills that people could cope with in normal times, but that get out of control in a crisis. We are seeing people who have just been eaten up by mosquito bites. Hamilton said, typically, people won't go to the doctor for mosquito bites, but the combination of standing water, a lack of electricity, and the need to work outside means lots of exposure. People are working outside all day long, cleaning up their homes, says Hamilton. The doors are standing open because they are carrying debris in and out. Aerial spray of a mosquito started this week by said Chris Van Diesen, a spokesman for the Texas Department of State and Health Services. They bring in heavy ordnance for the job, including an Air Force Reserve wing from Youngstown, Ohio, flying special equipped C-130 aircrafts. So this is what's happening there. And just a pause again. So notice that in that situation, even though a person might have somewhere to stay, but if they're there clean up their house, they're gonna have to be in and out. The doors have to be open. Water is everywhere. They're in a warm climate, so mosquitoes are everywhere. The mosquitoes are eating them alive. And so these are some of the things that one has to consider if one is in a situation where one have to evacuate, one have to flee. What you're gonna do with most naturally mosquitoes, because again, mosquitoes will eat you alive. And that's just the reality. And that's, to me, one of the most beautiful inventions when it comes on to modern time is to be able to keep away mosquitoes and other flies out of your house by, the screen on the window. But now you have this situation because of the heat, you're going to have to open those windows, but you have to open the door to get in and out. Exposure to mosquito, exposure to bites. And so it's always important to have like a mosquito repellent on you if you know you're in a warm area and you have to again flee, because somebody could even flee and say, well, they have nowhere to go but they can stay in the car and so forth. You're more exposed to the outdoors, you're more exposed, you have to keep the windows open. If it's hot, mosquito is going to bite, you're going to get mosquito repellent. So I believe an addition to a go bag, especially in a hot climate, is you prepare some mosquito repellent before time so you can spray it on yourself and you can get that protection, else the mosquito will eat you up. And some people like myself swell up when we get hit by mosquitoes. So we continue back to the article here. As floodwaters recede, mosquitoes numbers are going to start going up, says Dr. Peter Hotez, Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Houston Baylor College of Medicine. There are just debris everywhere, and it's like Aedes aegypti heaven. Aedes aegypti are the mosquitoes that carries virus such as dengue and Zika virus. Stagnating water in ditches, bayous, and flooded fields will breed other mosquitoes that spread West Nile virus. No one's sure how much worse things will get, says Dr. Humar Shah, who heads the Harris County Department of Health, is sure it will get bad. So here you have a situation now that's developing in Houston here, where people are becoming more exposed to mosquitoes that carry dengue, Zika, and other mosquitoes that carry the West Nile virus. So this is why I believe it's always important to deal with outdoors. And to me, the worst thing that is outdoor, beyond the snakes and alligators that are probably in some people's backyard right now, is the is mosquitoes, because you're more exposed to being bitten by mosquitoes and then pick up the one of these type of viruses. So very important to have like mosquito repellents. I just believe that is a key thing to have and to deal with in this type of situation. So we continue. He says teams are trying to replace mosquito traps pulled out hurriedly ahead of Harvey's flood. It's good to remove them, he says. They would have been washed away, but now it will take time to get back up and running for monitoring where disease-causing mosquitoes are breeding. Continue again, another thing that's going on in Harvey, down there in Texas. It says patients are beginning to come in with more urgent problem as they run out of insulin and blood pressure medication, says Joda Hodkins, CEO of Texas Association of Charitable Clinics. For some of our clients who supply insulin, a lot of them lost it because they lost refrigeration, Atkins says. And people are starting to show up with depression, anxiety, post traumatic stress disorder. I think mental health is going to be huge, Hopkins says. A patient came and said, I worked at Dollar General and store is wiped out. I'm out of a job. That has a huge impact, she says. Hamilton and Christ Clinic has already seen a big uptick in visits from people needing help from licensed clinical social workers and psychologists helping out at the facility. Typically, a mental health provider will see 8 to 9 patients a day. She said, we saw 32 mental health patients in one day this week. Harris County Shaw said he was struck by the experience endured by evacuees staying in a hotel. Every time the air condition came on at the hotel, she heard the water dripping and she started having flashbacks to the rain and rising water. That was true post-traumatic stress, Shaw said. It may sound trivial, but if a child loses a lovey, it can affect that child for years, Shaw says. If you have a 5-year-old whose favorite toy has been thrown out, the conversation you have now, if done well, can promote mental health. If not done well, it can cause more psychological trauma, Shaw said. So that's an interesting point of view before I wrap up this article here. So he's saying even a simple situation as having a child that has, like, I guess it's a teddy bear or some type of toy like that. That's their favorite toy, and the toy probably got contaminated with the water that was in the floods, and you got to throw the contaminated teddy bear out. Now you're gonna have to explain to the child and talk to the child in very serious ways about a teddy bear. Probably you have to take the teddy bear and bury it or something and say goodbye so you can have closure. But this is the type of stuff that's happening. So now there's increase almost in every single situation that has been discussed here so far. There's increase by threefold where there are people running out of medicine, exposure to mosquitoes, having post-traumatic stress disorder, because I can imagine what would happen if, as I say, you're sleeping and you hear the rain falling and you woke up and you say, I'm going to use the bathroom or something, and you step off your bed, and when you step off your bed, you stepped off in water, and it's the middle of the night and you're half awake and you're dazed. I can imagine the panic that's setting because while you're trying to figure out, am I asleep or am I awake? Is this a dream or is this real? That could be quite exciting, but that could leave you with some trauma whenever you come around water. So these are the type of things that's going on, and these are some of the stuff that you have to consider. Well, what would I do? And not that you're going to live your life in fear all the time, but you have to think, what would I do if I'm in one of these situations? Not so much, not especially what you do before, but how you deal with after. So anyhow, we'll wrap this up here. So it says authorities are cutting through red tape as quickly as they can. The state medical board is expediting license for out-of-state doctors to practice, and schools have loosened immunization requirements. Last month, a waiver came through for mold remediators, says the health department, Van Diesen. Dusen. As long as they register with the state health department, mole contractors can work without a license for as long as the disaster declaration is in effect. So, in essence, this is what it looks like, and we'll be looking like that. And most naturally, if as the reports coming from Florida about what's happening there with the recovery and disaster, especially what happened in the Keys and in areas like Naples. I'll continue to monitor that, share that, so we can kind of learn and understand. Because, as I say, we are dealing more and more with various different types of disaster. Good morning. So we're dealing with various different types of good disaster, and as we deal with this type of disasters, we have to consider, well, how to prepare before the disaster strike. Because, as I say, every area in the country, and most actually in the world, we are susceptible to some type of disaster, one or the other. And in this time period that we're living in, we know that disasters will increase in proportion to the wickedness of humanity. So as we see this, we have to say, well, what would I do? And how can I prepare? You can't prepare for every scenario, but you can prepare yourself in some basic ways to prepare for these troubles. Because the problem most of the time, as you've seen in almost all the major disasters that have hit in the last 15 years, that the biggest problem often for those who survive, most naturally, is what happened after the disasters. If you remember with Katrina, after Katrina took place, the problem came when the water started to rise. Everybody thought that, wow, New Orleans dodged a bullet, because just before the storm landed, the storm headed east of the city, and it kind of went up the side of the city. Most naturally, it flooded Lake Pontchartrain and then flooded the city later on because the levees failed. But then what we see there is that that type of thinking weren't in people's mind. That probably if I'm living in a fish bowl, or I'm living in a bowl of cereal or something, I should get out, because if this thing breaks, everything is done. So those are sometimes the simple thinking that you have to have. Firstly, to be here, where you live. It's important to consider where you live. You have to consider that, and consider what is the disaster that you're prone to, and then in general, what are you gonna do? Because again, as I say, if you live in an area and you're protected by levees, and they say rain is coming, you should be more reasonable and say, what, I'm going to get out. As we note here, and as it has been said, that we understand that before the 7 last plagues, all the disasters that come upon the earth will be mixed with mercy. We saw what could have happened in South Florida, but instead of the hurricane went to the east side of Florida, or central Florida, it went to the west, which probably most natural was a better hit per se, because it went up the Everglades side of Florida, which would have less concentration of people. But if it went up the east side, it would have been a massive disaster, because the east side is filled with a massive amount of millions of people from Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Plantation, all the way up to West Palm Beach. That's just, we can't imagine what would have happened. But again, if you know you're in an area that is just, it only take a certain amount of feet of the water to rise, and it's a disaster zone, the first thing you need to do before you deal with the post is just get out. Because what's going to happen now to me here, which is similar to Houston, is that the inundation of the services, the water, the sewage, the medical facilities, and the ability to get food and water again and fuel inside of the area becomes the crippling problem. Because if you can't get those services in, you're in an area that now becomes uninhabitable. Even if it's only for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, you have to contemplate that. Says, do I want to be in a location where water and food and medical supplies, getting it into the people is going to become a heroic task, in the sense that they're going to have to airlift, drop stuff in. If that's the area that you're in, I think it's best not to stay. I just think it's best not to stay in that type of area. I think it's best to ride it out for a week or two, rough it out with friends, in a hotel, something like that, if you have the money to do it. And if you can rough it out in the area or outside of the disaster zone, because I say some areas are more susceptible than others, then you're in a better condition because at least you don't have to deal with, oh, I can't get fuel to move around, I can't get food, I can't get water, I can't get my medicine, or I can't get doctor's treatment because the area is inundated with people rushing in to the remaining medical services. You get out and then you watch it from TV. You watch it on the TV. And I know most people say, but I can't leave because if I leave too long, people might steal my possessions. I think it's better to be in a hotel and know that people are stealing your possessions, but you can have some AC or some heat, you can have water, you can have your food, and you can be more comfortable. Then you're in an area and you're yes, great, you can look over your possession, your material possession, and you can be like, Lot's wife, where that's your only focal point. But it's a disaster zone. Why would you want to be in there? So that's where my concern is. My major concern is know and look at your treatment facility. If you have a treatment facility for sewage, where is it located? Is it located in high ground or low ground? Well, if that's the case, get out. Some towns do better than others. Some towns, they put their water treatment and their sewage treatment in the ice area so that if there's a disaster, it doesn't get inundated, especially with water. Know that. And if you know that, then again, I think it's just best to stay away for a week or two. And then now when they announce that water is restored and sewage is restored, then you go back to the area, you can join your fellow citizens in their sufferings. Other than that, you stay away. I think it's just best. You got to know your area. As I say, if you live in area New Orleans, some of these areas that are protected by levee, well, you look around still, you say, wait a minute, so where's the sewage treatment and where's the water treatment? Those are, to me, the two basic things. And after you figure out where those things are, then you ask yourself a question, do you want to stay? Also, where your house is located. If you have a house that is located near the river in a flood-prone area and it hasn't flooded for 30 years, now it's time to consider selling the house and buying a little bit higher or buying a total different town. Don't wait for the disaster to strike and everybody say, well, the disaster hasn't struck in 20 years or 30 years, so this is why I stayed. Just get out of there and get out of there now, because I'm going to tell you the next thing I'm concerned before I go with some of the preparations here and some more Bible passages. Is my concern is that you could live in an area that your house is the only house that is disaster proof. That means it's hurricane proof, it's tornado proof, it's flood proof, it's in the highest area. You build it on a mound, great for you. Okay, so you're that person that has the house. But now imagine what happened to some of these disaster zones in Houston. Some of these areas, the federal government have to buy out the house, but you're buying out at a cost that's going to be reduced. Also, you live in an area that if your house survives, you're probably going to be one of the few standing houses. The value is going to drop, but also the question is, do you want to really stay in there? And remember, life is sometimes like investments. You invest, and there's a point where the investment is great, the company you invested in is good. But there's a point you look around and you say, wait a minute, what I'm looking at here, this company future doesn't look too positive. So what I need to do is I need to divest of this company and get out before this company crash. And when you live in a community, remember your community is like investing in a business. And you're invested in a community because most communities are incorporated. You are one of the shareholders in that community because you're one of the people who pay the pooled taxes for services. And your value of your house is not just based upon how nice or how terrible your house look. It's based upon the community, the corporation that you buy into. Normally you're buying into it by buying land. You're making an investment in that corporation. And your taxes and your buy-in is going to pay for, the future infrastructure and services. So if you're buying into it, view your house as just an investment in a corporation. And if the corporate heads have not managed well that corporation, and they have not put in proper disaster preparedness, they haven't collected enough tax or used the tax well to pay for proper services, consider that you probably need to, while the going is good and somebody's willing to buy from you the house and that investment and buy your share out and give you the money back so you can go invest somewhere else, probably it's good for you to consider divesting yourself of that corporation and go join up with another corporation and buy into another corporation. And keep in mind, I'm talking about a house in here. And go into an area where they have proper flood mitigation, they have proper consider where they put their water treatment plant, where they put their sewer treatment plant, if you live in an area that has sewer treatment, and how they're going to survive if there is a disaster. I believe it's important, have your township paid for them to cut down trees that are near light pole, because a lot of time in these disasters, the trees take down the electric system, the grid, and then you can't get the grid back up. And that goes back again to the company you invested. A township is simply a company. But don't wait now, and you're living in a disaster zone and you're thinking, whose crazy idea was this to build a town in this disaster waiting to happen? And then now think, why was I crazy to buy into this area? That's a disaster waiting to happen. Or you bought into it because, how it goes, you didn't have a lot of money and that was all you could afford. But now you've been working for the last 10 years and your house has gone up in value. For what reason, I don't know, because you're in a disaster zone waiting to happen. Your house have gone up in value and there's somebody willing to buy it from you. Well, it's time for you to say, you know what, I made good on my investments. I'm going to sell out. I'm going to go higher ground. So I've seen it. I've gone to areas where I see it. There's a river and I can see that the river has risen in time past. And this, and they've built flood mitigation. But the better property are in the high section that is almost flood proof. Then the next value down would be the midway section down near to the river. And the worst area is right down next to the river. And you can get the houses cheaper. So say you buy the cheapest area and 5 years have passed, 10 years have passed. Don't be afraid to make tough decisions in life. And say, you know what, Ben? You turn to your honey and you say, look, honey, we're going to sell. We're probably going to take a few $1,000s loss because, we're selling them probably we won't be near 5-10 years. But, we're going to do it. We're going to bite that bullet. We're going to go through that pain. We're going to sell. We're going to move to the second tier or the first tier if you can afford it. And you move yourself out of that disaster zone. So first thing there. So go back to now. So to get what I'm going to talk about next, because I won't be able to spend all this time on it before I want to go back to some Bible passages with you to give you some insight of what's coming. One of the things that I covered like 2 weeks ago, after the Harvey devastation in Houston, is that it's important for you to have like a little bag where you have your insurance document, your copies of your insurance document, your title, copies of your driver's license, just copy of stuff that are documents that are important, the main page of your passport, just copies of it stored in a waterproof bag, in a bag. And in that bag now you're going to have all your supplies that you need in case of emergency. You're going to have one of these straws, the modern straws that they're making that has a filter system. You're going to have some charcoal on you. You're going to have any type of medication if you're on medication, if you're on supplements, any type of supplements you're on, just a little stash of it that can last you like for 2 weeks. You're going to have some, if you're on any type of herbal remedies, you're going to have like a little stash of it just secure there that you can have like about 2 weeks worth. You're going to have something that you can have like a little radio I'd covered last week. You can listen to the whole program because I'm not going to be able to give you this in detail. I'm just talking off my head here. So you're going to have a little radio, the AM kind of radio that you can be able to get news alerts of what's going on just in case you run out of power for your battery. These radios, they're hand cranked. They're small little $20 radio, $20-something radios that you can get news alert just in case you lose connection with the world because you lose power. You can't recharge your cell phone. In there, you can have, a change of clothes that you're going to be able to have. In some of the more advanced kit, they have these small little tents, small sleeping bags that you can have somewhere to sleep in just in case you get stuck outside. As I said in the beginning of the program, have something to deal with mosquitoes if you have to be outdoors so that you can have some mosquito repellent, especially if you can make it naturally. We'll cover some of that in the future. and things like that, so that you have a first aid kit on your little small first aid kit. They can stuff in the bag, and all the things that I covered last week that I can't cover right now because I want to move on. But I want to tell you this now. Why I think this is so important is that you're trying to figure out how to survive for a week or two. And normally they say it's like 3 days, to a week you need to survive. I will say if you have the space and you're a certain size family, even a week. And even if you have to flee somewhere, you have to go into a hotel. Remember, in a hotel, sometimes you're limited because you can get water, you can get a shower, but sometimes you have a problem with food. Sometimes you have a problem with getting certain supplies because, especially if you buy certain things online and they ship to you, and now you're in a local town and you can't get, the stores don't have what you need. At least you have a little bag where you have certain supplies that you can camp out in a hotel room. If you've been in a hotel room, you're kind of stuck. Even if you can get a little food, you're still kind of stuck there. You just need to have certain things. So if you need to make a call, call your insurance company, call this. You can make some calls, and you have your paperwork there. So listen to the last program I did about disaster preparedness or something like that. Now going back to this now real quickly before I move on. So remember, you're dealing with environmental problem. Another thing I want to say here is that every time you see one of these disasters, if you have to move in water, you move in water, but move in water, move out of it fast because you don't know what's in the water. And I'm not talking about, say, if somebody's in Florida and there's, snakes and crocodiles in the water. I'm talking about many times there's chemicals that are spilled in the water. And you notice that some of the people in Houston is having rashes. And that's one of the problems. Sometimes you see people moving around with water, and you think if you don't have to touch that water, just avoid it. If you have to be there and you have to touch it, well, what you need to have on you is charcoal. CHARCOAL. So charcoal, and it's normally the powdered charcoal, which is normally called activated charcoal. I believe every household need to have some powdered charcoal or capsulated charcoal on them. This is something I always have. If you go, especially if I'm going camping, I always have a first aid kit charcoal. You always have to have this on you. Charcoal, to me, is a miracle thing, especially if you're dealing with, say, you're walking and standing in water and you don't know what's in that water. After you get out of the water, you wash yourself off, and then where the water was touching, if you start developing rash, you put the charcoal on the rash, you wet it, and you put it over the rash. It dries, you wash again, and you probably do that 2-3 times a day to pull any toxins that get on you. If you're going camping, the charcoal is important because if you get bitten by mosquitoes, you put the charcoal there to try to pull out some of the toxins. If you get any type of food allergies, you drink the charcoal. The charcoal acts as a natural Pepto-Bismol. Very important in a post-disaster situation. Have charcoal. If you have yes, so a very important point that's came in here. A situation happened where sewage treatment plants normally get damaged or flood over when it comes onto a natural disaster. So when the sewage treatment plant get flood over, all that disease that is in that sewage treatment plant is going to be in the water. So you're interacting with sewage and all that thing. To me, again, this is a very important reason to have charcoal on you. You have powdered charcoal in the powdered form in a container or in a capsule. If you have a go bag, drop some of the capsule, one of the containers, the bottles of charcoal in there. You can't. It's just to me, it's one of these miracle things that you need to have. People talk about miracle products. Charcoal is a miracle product. Even if you're drinking water, you're not sure of the water. You pour some charcoal in the water, then drink the water, even if it's purified water. Because many times you have to evacuate to a different location. Even in America, you could not be familiar with the bacteria that are in the water locally. So say you drink water and you have to drink, say, from the tap. You pour you take a teaspoon or half a teaspoon or less, quarter teaspoon of charcoal, mix in the water, drink it. The charcoal will absorb any toxins. Say if there's bacteria normally get you sick because they give off toxins. The charcoal will absorb the toxins. So, so yeah. So if you drink, if you partake of, if you have to go and you didn't bring your supplements, you didn't bring your herbs, you didn't bring your medicine, you didn't bring whatever. To me, if there's one thing that I need on the go, that I don't leave home without, if I'm going on vacation, if I'm going camping, if I'm going, sometimes I even if I'm going somewhere I'm not sure what the food is gonna be like, charcoal, because it acts as it absorbs toxins. If I get a rash, if I get a mosquito bite, if I get a stomach virus, if I get exposed to whatever, charcoal is used as something that I always have on me. I've been in a situation where you go camping and somebody get just eaten by mosquitoes, and you just have to have some charcoal to just pull out the toxins. And then most such, if you have a mosquito repellent, great. If you have something for itch, great. It's always important under the herb, especially for if you listen to me from the Houston area. You can find grass anywhere. And normally in grass, the country over and sometimes the world over, there's this herb called plantain. Plantain is a herb that is normally in grass, people's lawn. And I wish I had one in front of me I could show you. But plantain is one of the number one herb, if not the number one herb to deal with itch. So if you have a mosquito bite, the number one herb now to put on that mosquito bite is plantain. You get the plantain and you either chew it up very quickly, not too long, just to break it up. And then you take it and then you squeeze the green juice on the bite. What it will do is stop the itch and it will deal with the inflammation. So between your plantain and your charcoal, if you can't get to a medical facility to deal with the mosquito bites, if you're outdoor, get the plantain herb. It's normally it's a succulent herb, and it can be even used in salads for the younger leaves. But the older leaves, you pick the older leaves, and it's a broadleaf herb. They normally try to kill the herb with pesticides or herbicides. You get that herb and you crush it up in your between your fingers, or you chew it a little bit, get the green juice to be flowing, and then you squeeze it and rub it on your bites. You do that, and after it dried, and you get a little charcoal, you put that on the bite. The plantain, number one herb, it beats so many even over the counter things that you could use, and you won't have to worry about any type of steroidal side effects. It will stop the itching, it will deal with the inflammation, take it down, and the charcoal again will pull some of the toxins out. Those are the two things that I would suggest. Again, if you're in that area, know again that go online, search before it happens, and get a good view of what plantain is as a herb. Go outside in your yard, or in somebody's yard, and learn to recognize the herb from pictures. Just get your cell phone, pull up plantain, and after you pull it up, PLAINTAIN, and you pull up it, look at it, go find it in grass, and know to recognize it. If you're in a bind, you're in the wild, or you have to be outside, it doesn't matter if you get eaten by mosquitoes. Just get some plantain, rub it on it. It will just take away the the pain, and you want to do this. So what is it? What type of situation we're looking at? So there's a big discussion going on online, and as you know, there's a big discussion going on about is this climate change, or is this the times we're living in, climate always change, don't worry about it. It's in some ways one can get caught up with a discussion about what's happening, why there's so many tornadoes that are just becoming mega tornadoes, and almost all these different storms are record breaking. This is not the biggest, widest storm, but the most powerful ever. That was Irma. What's going on, and why we keep seeing the crippling of massive cities in the United States? And these storms are just crippling, and it is not happening in America. They're happening in various different parts of the world. Is nature more violent? Those discussions, it's important to even listen to them, because it's important to listen to the arguments that each side is throwing out. But one thing I'm going to say here is at the end of the day, whatever is causing it, and as you know, we live the most environmentally light as we possibly can, because we believe this is God's word and we have to take care of it. But whatever the discussion is happening, it's important for you to note within yourself that the disasters are happening. So because the disasters are happening, one has to be prepared. So say it's climate change. We don't disagree with that. And the reason why we don't disagree with that, because we believe that what a man sowed, that shall he also reap. If you reap to the flesh, you shall reap corruption. If you sow to the flesh, you shall reap corruption. That it is a strong possibility that what we're doing to the environment is causing all the fish die off. All the fishes are dying from all these weird cancers, tumors growing on them. The animals on earth, it's not safe to even eat a deer because most of the deer has mad deer diseases, similar to mad cow diseases, because they're drinking from all this septic, this toxic lakes and ponds, and they're eating all these pesticide foods and stuff like that. These deers are sick. So when we look at what's happening in nature is revolting, but there is a strong argument that God is allowing, with mercy, for man to reap what he has sown. For now we're looking at, they're testing water ways and system across the world, and they're finding that they have small pieces of plastic that has dissolved into the water. So we poison our waterways, we're destroying the environment, and there's people who has a hard time believing that it's a possibility that we could be reaping what we have sown. Also, we know that there's a link between immorality and wickedness and disasters. And because there's a clear historical and biblical link, we believe that is a possibility that what's happening is also is because of the revolt of human beings. Then there's a revolt going on. So, and both links are linked, because as I say, the more immoral a person gets, the more it is that they'll just drive in a car, take the waste from the food containers they're eating and throw it through the window. Then they throw it through the window, and some animal now get caught up into their food, eating something, and they swallow it, and then they die. So our violent, immoral actions will cause us to filthy up the earth, fill the earth with toxins. As we look at what happened in Flint, the water crisis in Flint was created because human beings dump all that toxic waste in the rivers, and then think they're going to process the water and drink it, and the end result is that they drank their own poison. So keep that in mind when you're going through your day, that if somebody say, hey, look, you need to drink filter water or bottled water, don't knock against that idea, because remember, human beings poison the water and then go and drink it. We can do very stupid things. So we understand that, but at the end of the day, whatever the reasons that's causing nature to revolt or God to not be merciful and not stop these storms, at the end of the day, because there's the storms take, I always say the storm, interestingly enough, these hurricanes take the route of the slave ships. They come off the west coast of Africa, and then they head up the Caribbean and then end up to America. So whatever the reasons, these storms have increased. And for those who are in faith coming to believe that we're getting closer to the end of time, and these storms are coming because they're harbingers of worse to come. At the end of the day, they're coming. And because they're coming, and you see they're coming, you see that the trajectory, whether it be scientists or people who are biblical people, saying that this will increase, it's incumbent on you to be more prepared. It's incumbent on you. It's absolutely imperative that you start do what you need to do. If you're not doing what you need to do to get prepared, if you're not looking at your surroundings and ask yourself the question, what am I doing? Where do I live? What are my risk? Then you're going to end up being viewed, and you have to view yourself as you just being foolish. If you live in a tornado alley and you don't have a bunker, I want to say a bunker, one of these things that, I don't know, whatever they call them, that you go in and shut the door and lock yourself in until that thing wipe your house out, you're not being wise. Because, as I believe, those tornadoes will get worse. And the people that's going to be more affected are people in the poor people, because again, it's not like these tornadoes or hurricanes and so forth are not affecting rich, but it's many times the rich has more resources in the bank. They have more resources to protect themselves. It's easier for them to have a go bag. It's easier for them to have a few $100s on them if they haven't have enough money to stay in a hotel for a week or two. They have more resources. The poor get affected. So again, if you're part of a faith community, I have a church, ask your pastor, ask the elder of the church, can this church be a shelter? Can this church store food? Just in case the poor members in the community get affected, can we help the poor community? The poor members in the church, the church is poor. Firstly, can we help them? Can we prepared so that the church has a backup generator, the church has a wood stove, the church has a way to house people if they lose their housing? Is a church in a disaster zone? Is a church going to be the first to flood or the last to flood? These are things that you have to consider, because again, sometimes you individually can't do this preparation, but probably in a group you can pool your resources via the church nonprofit umbrella, and you can pool your resources and come together and say, you know what, we're going to prepare something. Might not be for the rich in the church because they can do all this on their own, but probably all the poor in the church can come together and do something for themselves with the help of those who have money. So you can have at least a preparation for those of the household of faith. But consider well these things, because as we know, the Bible predicts that these disasters will increase. We know that these disasters always match, as we know in Genesis chapter 6, that the flood was based upon the increase in wickedness in the land. And I'll try to get at least one or two of this before we go. Genesis 6 verse 3 says, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Verse 5, and the Lord God saw that the wickedness of men was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And you know the rest of it. For the sake of time, I'll pause there. So what God says, I will send a flood. And the flood basically was to wipe out the evildoers. Now, some people question this, but I don't, because I understand why. There are wickedness and crimes that are going on that are not being paid for by the inhabitants of the earth. If you notice that the areas that often get hit are some of the areas that are some of the most immoral, godless areas in our world. A lot of these islands are areas that immorality are up to the hilt. I have a problem even when I go to some of these places because the immorality is out of control. And one of these places are the little party islands. You go there to just do sin and debauchery and vomiting because of all the drugs, alcohol, and stuff that's going on. And that's what these places are. There's just a bedlam of sickness. And yet there are people who are righteous that are there at times. But the majority of what's going on there is just immoral. And so we will see more and more. I believe that many of these islands are just going to get wrecked, because what's going on there is just unreal. And yet they're religious folk, but they're just almost like in a Lot situation, where it's just the amount of sexual immorality, crime, vice, all these things are there, and they're just waiting to be wiped out. So you have to have your contingency plan. So what are you going to do? Where you live, are you living in a disaster zone? If you live in a disaster zone and you're on one of these islands, you need to move to higher ground, because the disasters are coming. Because many a time the things that are going on there, it is unreal. Even as sinners, saved by grace, looking at the corruption, it make you to shock at times, the level of madness people can go through with their homosexuality and bestiality and murder and all this type of thuggery and rapes and just theft and all these things going on. And in many of these places now, witchcraft has become in vogue. Genesis 6 verse 11 through 12. I'll read verse 10. It says, and the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And so as the earth is filled with violence, the Lord would normally turn back the violence on them. Now I believe the devil is still in charge of these things, but the Lord doesn't put put in mercy. Just allow these things to happen. So if you're in a disaster zone, especially if it's a moral zone that has a lot of murders, a lot of things like that are going unsolved, know that these places are slated for destruction. Know where you live. Is it a flood zone? Is it a tornado zone? Earthquake zone? Is it a hurricane zone? Be prepared. Do some pre-preparation and be prepared for what happened after the disaster passed, because normally there's going to be an outbreak of disease, food problem, water problem. What are you going to do? Get those preparation going. And as we do this from day to day on Revive Reform Radio, I'll try to share with you some of the things that I'm doing, and I'm encouraging those that I worship with and communicate with even here what to do to get themselves ready, because we're going to see more of this. Let us pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, we thank thee again for the blessings of this day. We thank you, dear Lord, for your word, and we pray, dear Father, that we might heed the warnings that you give us in your word, heed the warnings that we receive even from those that are looking at nature and thinking that something has gone wrong. May you bless us, dear Lord, that in all that we do, that we might always walk humbly before thee. This is our prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, thanks again for being with me here on Revive Reform Radio. Looking forward to talking to you tomorrow morning, where we should talk about current events. Until then, I pray that you may continue to walk with the King.